Hello and welcome to Unstress. My name is Dr. Ron Ehrlich. I'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which I am recording this podcast, the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, and pay my respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging. Well, in today's episode, we are going to explore the world of naturopathy, homeopathy, public health, chronic disease, the pandemic response, and much, much more. My guest is Daniel Baden, one of Australia's best known and respected naturopaths and homeopaths, and not just in Australia, but also in the international complementary therapies industry and community. He's been very involved in both for over 20 or even 30 years. Beginning his journey as a clinician, Daniel has assumed many roles over the years, including consultant to and member of many industry regulatory committees, providing technical support to practitioners, assisting various groups in research projects. He's a lecturer, an author, a co-founder and executive director of Biomedica Nutraceuticals, one of the most highly regarded supplement companies used by health practitioners in Australasia. He is currently on the executive board of the Complementary Medicines Association, the CMA, as chair of the practitioner committee. He is a highly experienced presenter. Daniel's been lecturing to the general public, undergraduates and practitioners since 1990. His extensive experience and interest in ongoing practitioner education ensures that his seminars are empowering and a worthwhile experience for all attendees. And most recently, Daniel presented webinars for health practitioners only on the pandemic, which we discuss in some detail in this episode, and which, interestingly, has been attended by over 20,000 health practitioners. So Daniel is someone health practitioners are keen to listen to. Daniel's also a board member of the Australasian College of Nutritional and Environmental Medicine, ACNEM. I hope you enjoy this conversation I had with Daniel Baden. Welcome to the show, Daniel.
Hi, Ron. Lovely to be here. Thank you.
Daniel, I've been looking forward to talking to you because I know you, in the world of naturopathy, homeopathy, complementary medicine, you are listened to by many, many people, and I'm looking forward to sharing you with my listeners. Naturopathy, I wondered if you could just tell us, what is naturopathy? What's the guiding principles behind it?
Well, thanks, Ron. I guess the two primary principles are to treat the person and not just treat the cause, which, we talk about a lot, and that's talked about as holistic medicine, I guess. And the other thing is to understand and respect the power of nature and its ability to heal, are really important. So traditionally, historically, naturopathy has been around for a very long time. And it's progressed and it's evolved over time. However, the one fundamental which I feel is really important is around education. And naturopaths have been treated themselves as teachers. And it's really about, teaching our patients or our clients, whatever you want to call them, but I call them patients, in how to live their life with more fulfillment and a healthier approach to their life. So for me, education is a really important aspect. And part of that education is really helping patients understand their relationship with the external environment and the internal environment. And that means everything that they live in, everything that we live in as humans, I should say. And I find it fascinating because every journal I pick up, for every disease just about, whether it's oncology or whether it's diabetes or psychological disorders, all you can find reference to spending more time in nature as part of the cure. Recently, Canadian doctors, as an example, were given a license to give free nature park permits to patients with mood disorders.
Wow.
Because they recognize that it completely changes people's mindset. In oncology, we like it, and in allergy, we like it because, it's kind of interesting. Trees drop little particles, which are irritants to the immune system, which, trigger a positive immune response. So this stuff's all in the journals, but as we build more concrete around us, we don't spend enough time in nature. So I guess naturopathy, to get back to the point, is really about looking at all of these aspects which affect us as humans and trying to find a path back to that balance of what's important.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because people are really seeking out this kind of approach. I mean, intuitively, there are the cohort that go, I'm going to the doctor, he's going to give me a prescription, that's what I expect, and often they are not disappointed. But there's a huge cohort of people in the population that want more, and that more is exactly what you described.
Yeah, look, and I think there's a few aspects to that, and I think people often just forget. They get caught up in their busy lives, and they forget just to spend time in nature. And in all of our cities in Australia and other parts of the world, we're so fortunate to be surrounded by bush, and we're so fortunate to have these amazing botanical gardens and huge parks in the middle. We just don't spend enough time in them. Even spending time at the ocean is really important. But it really is changing that mindset is the education part that naturopathy is really importantly noted for.
Another aspect of the natural world that has ironically been demonized is sun, isn't it?
Oh, yeah. It's so interesting. And I guess, that's one of the differences between holistic medicine and modern medicine, for want of a better word. Because in holistic medicine, you look at something like the sun and you take it as part of the whole piece of the pizza. That's the gluten-free pizza, of course.
Of course.
Wheat-free and organic. But it's we know that you spend time in the sun and it's important, and it just should be part of what you do every day. But when you have maybe a specialist who's just so focused on one aspect of a person's being, and they say all these studies show that too much sun exposure causes skin cancer, therefore everyone should be out of the sun. Well, that's really not realistic, and I know that's a simplified example.
No, but it's a very powerful message, public health message.
No, absolutely. So, I guess naturopathy just steps back and says, well, you can't take out one body system or one disease or one aspect by itself. It's really everything in moderation. And, as my grandmother used to say, even moderation in moderation.
Yeah. No, I love that sort of, as you say, every disease is identified as being part of a lifestyle. A lifestyle has a contributing factor to almost every chronic degenerative disease that's preventable, like heart disease, cancer, diabetes, autoimmune condition, blah, 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 blah. And yet it's really a little more than lip service, isn't it, in many people's health journeys?
Well, the World Health Organization has mentioned, cancer as having some of the causative factors, 30 to 90%, depending on which of their studies you quote. But a high percentage of cancers have a relationship to diet and lifestyle. And as you just said, it's rarely talked about. How many oncologists talk about it? None, as far as I know. And I've been dealing in that area for a long time. It's really, it's so important. But even the journals talk about it, but it just doesn't seem to come through to the coalface of medical practice that often.
It's almost like, you mention it in passing. Oh, and lifestyle's important. So I've ticked that box. I've talked to them. I've talked to them about lifestyle, right. And that it's ironic. Now, another aspect that I know you are very familiar with and passionate about is homeopathy. And tell us a little bit about homeopathy 101. What are the principles that guide us there?
Well, look, homeopathy's been around for about 250 years, or getting close to that. And basically, it's a very simple ideology of suggesting that what a substance can cause, it can cure. And, a simple example might be something like an onion. When you cut an onion, you might get stinging eyes and a runny nose. And so if a patient comes to see you with those symptoms, which may be hay fever or a dust mite allergy or whatever, you may go, you look like someone that's been cutting up an onion, and therefore I'm going to recommend homeopathically prepared onion to you. And you would almost think it's something that like what an allergist would do, because an allergist would often give a small dose of something to build it up. And you see that with peanut allergies and that sort of thing in Australia. But it's a little bit different because the preparation of the homeopathic medicine is quite unique. And there are two words that are used in the preparation. One is succussion and one is dilution.
Succussion. I haven't.
Succussion.
Yeah. Okay.
So succussion is a process, and traditionally done by hand, where you might take some of the a small amount of the onion juice, if we keep going with that example, add it to 1 part to 10 parts water, and you basically bang it up and down in your hand for a prescribed amount of time to try to get a frequency impression of the onion impregnated into the water. So the water holds energy, and water is known to hold energy. There's plenty of documentation around on that aspect. And you're trying to get it to hold the frequency that's reflective of whatever the initial substance was. And then you dilute it again. So it becomes 1 in 100, or 1 in 1,000, 1 in 1,000,000, 1 in 50 million, etc. And you're succussing all the way through.
Right.
So in homeopathic principle, the higher the dilution and the more succussion that's gone on would suggest that it will act deeper in the body or deeper within the psyche of a human being. So it might be more suited to where there's a psychological component to the condition, whereas the lower doses, like a 1 in 20 or 50 or 1,000, might be something that is more physically orientated. So if someone came in with going back to the onions, if someone came in with symptoms of hay fever, I might use a 1 in 1,000 or a 1 in 10,000 potency for that patient. If they came in and said, every time I think of my ex-boyfriend, I start crying and my eyes tear up and I get really emotional, I might consider the 1 in 1,000,000 potency or the 1 in 10 million potency, depending on the whole symptom picture. It's far more complicated than I've just described, but that in a nutshell is what it's about.
So dose does not make the poison here. It's not
dose.
Yeah, I mean, you were saying actually the more diluted, the deeper the potency. Yeah, as in deeper within the individual, rather than just a more superficial problem that might be physically manifest itself.
Yeah, that's right. So I'll just give you one example, and I'll use myself as an example. When I was a young boy, I had a terrible psoriasis throughout my scalp and neck. And when I was 21, I went to a homeopath who gave me a remedy, and it ended up being a remedy that was a 1 in 200,000 dose. And he said, take, I can't remember now, 3 drops or 7 drops for 3 days. That was it, no more, which I did. And within a week, my psoriasis had gone. And I'm a few years older than 21 now, Ron, and it hasn't come back.
Only just, Daniel. Only just. Yeah. Well, actually, it's interesting because I had a patient in this week, and they're both academics. They're really up on evidence based. They're very big on that, and they had a son who at a very young age was literally banging his head on the floor. That was his symptom, and they took him everywhere, and it was actually a homeopath that eventually solved the problem, to their surprise.
That must have been inconvenient to them.
It was, but they were obviously very, very delighted with that, and it just reminded me of the I guess the potency of stuff that we don't necessarily all understand.
No, that's right. Look, there's so much stuff we don't understand, and it's only our arrogance that stops us as humans from understanding things more.
I mean, thinking about that, I'm almost thinking that on that level, we're talking on a quantum level of how that would be effective.
Yeah, look, and I agree with that. And I really think it is that frequency that is so important. And at a quantum level, I guess the best way I could describe it is it resonates with a specific group of cells. So if we took, if you a room and you put 100 radios in it and they're all tuned to one radio station except for one, which is tuned to another radio station, and you send in the homeopathic frequency, it's only that cell that's going to pick it up, or that radio. So it's really about mimicking the frequency and finding the group of cells that the homeopathic remedy will resonate with. It's fascinating, and there has been work done by the Koreans, South Koreans, around the bonds of water, the hydrogen bonds that hold the water together, oxygen and hydrogen, actually having a massive potential to store energy. And it's really fascinating. And it changes the frequency. So a colleague of mine once, to prove that there was a change to the structure of water, and I was hoping to find the slides so I could show you, but I'll send them to you. He photographed water in different homeopathic doses or strengths. So he took, as one example, a herb called pulsatilla, and he took it, in a 100th potency, 1,000th, so 1 millionth, etc. And he also used real water. And you could see when he took it to the cold room at Monash University for a refrigerator, froze it all, and with a high, powerful camera, photographed them. And you could see that there was significant change in the crystallization of the water. So you could use the most sensitive lab equipment and you would not find any pulsatilla in a 121M. But you could clearly see that the physical structure of that drop of water had changed beyond what any water had looked like. So something changes.
Yeah. Now, these all constitute, and they're not the only part of, what a term that is called complementary medicine. And I know you've been very involved in the complementary medicine industry. Talk to, we're getting a few definitions here today.
Right.
So tell us about complementary medicine. What encapsulates complementary medicine?
Well, look, for me personally, I'd rather use the word holistic or natural medicine.
I like that word holistic. I feel very comfortable with it.
Because complementary medicine to me means that it's the term can mean that it's complementary to other forms of medicine, which is fine. It is. Most naturopathic medicine is, but it doesn't have to be. It acts very well as a standalone system of medicine. So for me, I just don't want to pigeonhole what we do, because I find what natural medicines offer is so powerful. I don't want to be pigeonholed as saying we just assist other medicines.
Yes, okay.
This is just my thinking.
No, I like that, and I think that's a good point. That is a good point.
So for me, natural medicine, holistic medicine is a better definition of what we offer our patients.
It's interesting, that word holistic, isn't it? Because I've lived with that professionally for almost 40 years, and some of the things that people think it's about are so out there and weird that it's almost like people need to be reminded the human body is a great example of something that is holistic. And if you're skeptical about that word or that idea, then you have some serious reflection to do.
Well, I agree. And it's kind of funny because the word's been hijacked by others in the medical profession. And I think if someone is holistic in a medical profession and they're truly holistic, kudos to them. Fantastic. Whether they're a holistic doctor or a holistic dentist or whatever they do, if they're incorporating those natural medicines into the philosophy of what they do, fantastic. But when you see some, unusual things, like a conference I was at a couple of years ago in the US before COVID, and I was walking down the street and saw a straight, and I had a conversation with the receptionist in a cosmetic surgery place, and all they were doing was Botox and, boob lifts and all that sort of thing. And they called it holistic cosmetic surgery. And I'm going, what is holistic about this? There's no reference to anything.
Yes.
But it was a fashionable tag, I guess.
I think one of the things, because as a holistic dentist, as an example, I think it's about an attitude too, and that is to recognize that a whole range of things affect a person's health.
Yes.
And where I, as that particular practitioner, fit into that model. I don't necessarily have to have all of the answers and have all of the holistic features that could impact, but I need to be aware of them and respectful of them. I think I've always thought of it as a dentist, for me, as a dentist with attitude.
A dentist with good attitude.
Good attitude.
I don't think any of us know the answers to everything, and it'd be sad if we did, because it's so great to keep learning. But at the end of the day, what you're offering is a mindset that's compatible with good outcomes. So you don't really need to know everything. You need to be able to, accept that there are many aspects to a human being, and you're performing one set of duties, but there are other influences that may affect or may not affect you and your patient. And it's that relationship, as much as anything, it's that relationship between the practitioner and the patient. And, what I think is probably one of the most important aspects of being a holistic practitioner overall is the ability to listen.
Yes.
And just acknowledge whatever our patient is going through is critically important. Because, so many, and I know you would have seen this, Ron, but so many people come in from standard medicine where they describe some symptoms, and if it's not in the textbook, it doesn't exist, or it's in their brain, in their mind. And that's just not true. We just have to accept what our patient is presenting with. And it's the patient's reality. And because it's the patient's reality, it's our duty, I feel, as a practitioner, to actually really listen. And that means not just hear what they're saying, but really listen to what they're saying. I just think is a critical aspect of holistic medicine.
I couldn't agree more. And I'm sure people in this field see it all the time, because in a short consultation, which is typical of modern medicine, often if the practitioner is not familiar with the patient's problem or can't identify or doesn't know, then they are often dismissed. And I think this validation is an important one. I mean, we're going to jump a little bit ahead here because I think, the pandemic has really presented issues around that as well, whether it be the reaction to the virus, whether it's a long COVID, whether it's a reaction to the vaccine. What's been your experience about that? I know you've lectured on this just recently, and it was extremely well received. I mean, I think you lectured to some health practitioners.
That was a fascinating journey into the mindset of humans and politics and bureaucracy.
Tell us a bit about those two webinars. I know they were for health practitioners, but that's okay. You could give us a sort of a high level.
Sure. Look, the first one was about, at the time, no one was talking about it, and everyone was frustrated because no one really understood what the mRNA was all about, or, other forms of the new vaccine. So the first one was trying, and there was a lot of fear associated with it, and people were scared of COVID, and people were scared of the vaccine, and people were scared of everything, and the media and bureaucracy was just driving this fear. So the levels of anxiety were going through the ceiling. So the first one was an attempt to really, and I think successful, I hope, to try to get people to understand what the vaccines were about, and then apply a holistic brush over it and say, well, you choose what is best for you, and because people were being pressured to get the vaccines, and some people just really had to continue working. Doctors had to, naturopaths had to keep their clinics open, but some of them refused and just decided, I'm not going to practice for a year or two, and everyone made their choices. So I respect everyone's choices and what they wanted to do. But for the people that felt like they had to get the vaccine as their livelihood, then, the discussion went on to what we could do as holistic practitioners to help support the body through the vaccine process. And we had to try to unravel what the vaccine was and understand it, and then what it could potentially do to a human. I spent a lot of time researching it, and I knew that I ran the potential of getting in so much trouble with so many authorities. But I thought it was important, and important enough to open my big mouth.
Yep.
And I made sure pretty much every word I said had a scientific reference attached to it.
Yes.
Still got in trouble, but anyway.
That's okay. Yeah. But so just remind us, because this word vaccine has been used as though, and vaccines have been around for 50, 60, more years than that. And they've been traditional in a very particular way. But this loaded, whether you were talking about the Pfizer, the Moderna, or even the AstraZeneca, was different.
Yeah. So
talk to us about that difference.
Yeah, sure. So the traditional vaccines, the one that get given to children and these sorts of things, are usually a dead or a fairly almost dead virus or bacteria that are used. So they take a virus, they kill it or half kill it in a lab, and so it's significantly weakened, and then they inject it into you, and your immune system can overcome it and build a response. So I think that's, it's interesting, because what's happening is that you're using a whole vaccine, a virus, and the immune system will respond to various aspects of a virus. So a virus has multiple proteins and multiple sugar units in it, like all cells. So the body mounts a response, whether it's B cells or T cells, to various aspects. So you develop a long-term immunity to a lot of the different vaccines. These RNA and mRNA vaccines and DNA vaccines were quite different. So, and they weren't especially new. They were experimented with in 1978, is when they first started to come to bear, because they were looking at mRNA vaccines in oncology and trying to work out vaccines for cancer. But those projects were dropped because there were some concerns about safety. So that being what it is, they were redeveloped when COVID came out, and they are not. So they're not like a traditional vaccine, but what they did was they took some mRNA, for example, which is when you have DNA, you need RNA to help replicate to make more DNA. So you took a bit of RNA, you injected it into somebody's cells, and that RNA started to instruct the DNA to produce more proteins. Well, actually just one specific protein, a spike protein. So the spike protein was on the outside of the coronavirus, but it didn't have any of the other proteins. So, as a little sideway, all those drug companies are trying to rush to find a way to include other proteins into their vaccine so you get a broader immune response. That's what they're trying to do right now, because what's happened today, you produce this spike protein, but you get an antibody response, but it doesn't trigger other aspects, particularly of the immune response, for any length of time. So, that's why we find ourselves having, more boosters, and there'll be more boosters because, the immune response just wanes. And that's the difference. So you're getting the body to make these spike proteins rather than injecting a half-dead virus. Yeah.
It's kind of the old vaccine was taking a more holistic view of the pathogen, wasn't it? It was saying, here is a pathogen which you mentioned T and B cells, and not guessing, they are an important part of the immune function, and they need to have memory of that immune response, and that's what gives vaccinations their thing. But here we actually did two different things. One was get into the human cell, which we hadn't done before, and produce a spike protein, to which the body supposedly mounts an immune response, but it doesn't last very long.
No, because it's producing a response to one protein, not a group of proteins.
Yes,
and so as the coronavirus mutates, those spike proteins change.
Yes.
So they can bend, or the place, even on clever variants, the placement of specific amines changes position. So the antibody comes along and goes, oh, look at that, a spike protein. Oh, hang on a second. No, it's not. And leave it alone. And so that's kind of interesting.
Whereas, and there was a major breakthrough in Australian medicine, Daniel, since we spoke last week, and that was that they've now recognised that natural immunity is a thing. I had actually lost faith in natural immunity. I thought it had been phased out of healthcare completely. But people who have been infected by the whole coronavirus with all its component parts, to your point, have mounted an immune response to that and to all of the complexities of that.
That's right.
I've never heard it quite put as nicely as that, Daniel. I really haven't. That's a really important point that you've made there. I really think that's an important point.
So the other missing part of that puzzle is okay. So we've accepted that we can mount an immune response to the whole virus, and the part we really should be discussing, which we like and want to discuss in holistic medicine, is how do we support the body build a better and sustained response.
Yes.
And that's the critical part for me that's missing. So, we both know some doctors and professors that have, written many, many letters to our bureaucrats and senior medical advisors about vitamin Ds and zincs and vitamin Cs and the importance of quercetin. And my favorite is Nigella sativa. Black seed, and all these substances which have got good evidence behind them, particularly vitamin D, and they just gets ignored. So, apropos our earlier conversation, stay out of the sun, which gives you vitamin D.
Yes. Isolate. Stay indoors. Don't go outside. Cover yourself. Right. It's creating the perfect storm, isn't it? Really?
Oh, absolutely.
It has created the perfect storm.
Absolutely, it has. So I really wish that, and I think one of the big failings of natural or holistic medicine is that we are generally pretty pathetic at politicking and PRing, because we just don't seem to find a way in to convince our leaders, and never really have.
well, it's an interesting one, Daniel, because I know you've been involved in the complementary, the holistic medicine field of supplementation, because I know you've been involved in that for many, many years. Yeah. And, talk to us a little bit about what it takes to get supplements through in Australia. I mean, you've dealt with the TGA many times, I'm sure. Tell us about that process.
Well, look, I owned a company which produced vitamins, which I don't own anymore. I was around when the TGA first came in 1989, and it scared the shit out of us. Oops, can I say that? Sorry.
Of course you can.
But it, because it brought a paradigm of structure to the production and manufacture of natural medicines that we'd never seen anywhere in the world. And it brought anxiety, as you can imagine. People had to rethink how things were made. But, with the benefit of hindsight, it is fantastic. And it's particularly fantastic for our patients, because our patients in Australia, if you get an Australian-made supplement, know that what is on the label is on the bottle, is in the bottle.
Yeah,
and that's really important. People are spending good money on these things, and you want them to work, and they need to work. So, when you produce a supplement in Australia, you have to have some rudimentary evidence to present to support it.
Mm-hmm.
You have to do stability trials, and it's checked all the way through. The raw material is analysed, the encapsulation during the process is analysed, and then we do chemical analysis of the supplement every 3 months or 6 months or 12 months, depending on the supplement and what the needs are. So the guidelines are phenomenal and really akin to producing a pharmaceutical drug if you get something from Australia. So it's really good.
Yeah. So coming back to, I'm just intrigued. You said something there. We are as holistic practitioners just not very good at the politics of. I think there's another aspect to it. I know the pharmaceutical industry is worth about $1.2 trillion a year.
Yep.
And I'm not sure what the supplement or the complementary industry is worth, but I imagine not even close to that.
Well, it is around about $5.5 billion a year.
Okay, billion, that's right.
Billion,
but I repeat, 1.2 trillion is a lot more than 5 billion.
But even in that billion, it's a little bit deceptive, because I think included in that are things like massage therapies,
right,
and other aspects.
So the influence of the supplement industry is kind of, I mean, when we consider that the pharmaceutical industry on the average gets fined about $3 or $4 billion a year, which I think for the pharmaceutical industry would probably be considered petty cash, or an inconvenient marketing expense.
That's right.
When you talk about a supplement industry of $5 billion a year, I think it's not hard to see why we are, in your words, crap at the politics, because we just they don't have the influence.
No, we don't have the influence, and we don't have the engagement. The drug companies work by engaging with very expensive PR companies. And we see the influence of that in our everyday lives. So, there's not that many journalists around anymore. And so what it is big pharma paying PR companies to send articles to newspapers, and the journalist puts their name on it, and it gets published. So, the influence is significant, and it's the amount of money involved, it's just quite difficult to break through that.
There's, we use the term holistic has been bastardized and hijacked by various interests. I think another term that's been bastardized is evidence-based medicine. I think there was an article recently in the BMJ, the British Medical Journal. We did a podcast on it, The Illusion of Evidence-Based Medicine. Evidence-based medicine isn't everything it's cracked up to be, is it?
No, it's not, and there are many aspects to that, and one of the interesting aspects that I've noted through the journals over the last few years is this is quite interesting, I thought, is concern about using mice models, because, as you know, many drugs are tested on mice, and they've only started to realize that if you get mice from different laboratories, they're fed different nutrition in different laboratories. And so if one mouse has got more vitamin D or vitamin A, it will react differently with the drug. The age of the mouse is coming into play, because as you age, you atrophy, and we all do. So our various organs get harder or don't work as well. So if you've got your first batch, on young mice, and you get a response from the drug, and the second batch comes from an atrophied mouse, you get a different response. So it's quite difficult to understand, to do your calculations on that. And then the other part to that is, a high percentage of pharmaceutical drugs, the studies are not reproducible.
Yes.
So
now that actually, I've just read the science there, and in the science of medicine, 85% of articles in evidence-based medicine are not reproducible.
So
that's quite sobering.
terrifying.
It is
And
terrifying.
and I guess there are many reasons, but one of the reasons is, and we saw this with the mRNA vaccines, is the people that they initially tested these on, and the study sample was something like 83% white people of over 50, and you only had a 1% black people, 1% Chinese people, 1% younger people. So you were getting a very flawed model of broad humanity. So it's extremely concerning when we're saying, well, let's give these vaccines to kids who are 5 years old now, because those massive studies didn't include kids. They didn't include pregnant women. And so how do we, hand on heart, justify using some of these drugs or vaccines where those models haven't been used? And that may cause different reactions in different societies and different groups. There's just, it's just a little bit dodgy. The first coronaviruses were discovered 20 to 30,000 years ago. They found them in the teeth, viruses in the teeth, actually.
Wow.
Of mummified people they'd found.
Yeah.
Most of them came from Asia, and they believe that causes groups of people that came from those Asian countries to have a different response to the coronavirus than we, who weren't exposed 20,000 years ago. These things carry through. So, how do you study for that? I don't know, but it's interesting.
It's kind of sobering that I spoke to a professor of pediatrics who is very senior in public health policy. When I asked him, how do you justify giving 5-year-olds, because my granddaughter is 6 and there was no way I was going to suggest that she have that. How do you justify giving that without the evidence? And his response was, how will we know it's safe if we don't use it?
Yeah.
That took my breath away. And once I picked myself up from the floor in apoplexy, I could barely contain myself.
Well, one of the worrying things around that is, when we were sold the mRNA vaccines, we were told that the mRNA would just break up and dissolve, and that would be it. You wouldn't have any knock-on effect. But in one of the latest genetics journals that came out earlier this year, they could prove that human liver cells actually changed the DNA permanently after being exposed to the mRNA vaccine, and there are more studies following on from that. So that's kind of scary. We're actually changing the blueprint of humans.
Yeah. The interesting thing about the rejection of things like vitamin D and zinc and all of that was the importance of emergency use authorization, wasn't it? I mean, that was a very big part of rejecting things like ivermectin or vitamin D or zinc, because if you had an effective treatment for a condition, then you couldn't rush these new vaccines through with emergency use authorization.
Yeah, look, I'm sorry, that's a bit above my pay grade.
Okay, that's right.
But I would encourage your listeners. There's a fantastic website called Our World in Data, and you can go in there and manipulate your own studies, and by that I mean that the data's all there. But you can look at India versus Australia versus the US.
Yeah.
And India, before they had vaccines, were using ivermectin and vitamins. And you could then bring in a template asking for what the death rate and all that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
It's fascinating.
Okay. Our World in Data. Our World in Data. Yeah, we should have a link to that. Now, I know that you've also lectured a lot on oncology, on cancer. Yeah. And, what role does naturopathy, homeopathy have in oncology?
Yeah, look, it's fascinating. So I'd just like to keep myself out of jail and say naturopaths don't treat cancer. We just support patients with cancer.
Sure. Okay. Good. Noted. Yeah.
We mentioned earlier that the World Health Organization has identified that 30 to 90% of all cancers have a foundation in diet and lifestyle, and that's something which pricks up our ears as holistic practitioners. And that goes to, the chemicals that we're exposed to, viruses, and alcohol consumption and cigarette consumption, exercise, diet. Cancer is driven by excessive energy consumption. So if you've got a rich sugar diet and you're not doing much to get it out of your system, there's a much higher risk. This is all published data. It's just not me saying it. It's really well published and known and always has been. Your chances of developing cancer are significantly increased. So the other, areas I guess we look at is looking at the whole person and trying to look at those factors. So there's a concept. Do you know the word immunosenescence?
Go on. No, I'm not familiar with that.
So immunosenescence describes basically the aging of the immune system. So I think it literally means, senility of the immune system. So as we get older, all of our immune system starts at some point in our life going to some form of, decrease. And if you've lived a fairly healthy lifestyle and looked after yourself, it might be in your 80s, 90s, maybe 100, you start to significantly not be able to fight viruses and infections as well as you used to. But you can short circuit that. You can kill off your immune system faster through eating lots of sugar, living a crappy lifestyle, being obese, and having ongoing inflammation issues and these sorts of things. Chronic infection. Now, as a holistic dentist, having a chronic infection in your tooth, even if it's not felt, can certainly, increase heart disease and create chronic inflammation throughout the body as your body's constantly trying to deal with it, So, that is something that we would look at with the patients, because we know that in an immunosenescent individual, their ability to fight disease is significantly diminished. Their dendritic cell activity drops significantly. Their NK cell activity drops significantly. And that's been measured.
NK being natural killer cells.
Yep. And so their ability to your natural killer cells are probably the most important cell, in my view, that it comes to when dealing with cancer, particularly secondaries and metastases. So I once brought out a professor of oncology from Switzerland, and Ben Pfeiffer, his name is. You could look him up. Fascinating man, and he did some research and presented it. And when he first presented this, he got laughed off stage. And 2 years later, they said, "Actually, come back, please," because he demonstrated that when you get a biopsy for prostate cancer, you're actually rupturing an encapsulated, usually, tumor. And he said, but when you do that, you're releasing up to 20 million cancer cells into the bloodstream. And so you want to make sure that the patient can deal with all this free-floating little cancer cells in the bloodstream every time you do a biopsy. And he demonstrated that the most effective way of doing that was to build up NK cells, natural killer cells. And there are some good, natural substances available to help do that. We used a rice bran arabinoxylan compound. There's some good research behind that product, but there are a number of other, substances you can use. So that's those NK cells become very, very important. And so, you've got to try to assess where that person's immune system is as part of the consultation. Yeah.
Gosh, you made me feel weak then, because I did get a diagnosis of prostate cancer about 6-7 years ago, and I did have a biopsy, and I was very focused on trying to support my immune function as much as I could through that process and afterwards.
Yes.
that is, people say, oh, if you're on a good diet, you don't need supplements. Well, I'd like to know who is on a good diet and
Yeah.
whose food has been grown in good soils.
Yes.
So I guess they are part of, I know Ross Walker, we have Ross on regularly, once a year with our heart specialist, and Ross says, I know people say, oh, it's just expensive urine, but I also like having expensive blood as well.
Yeah. Look, I find that quite funny because once we were looking at writing an article called "The Cost of Urine," and and we were going to compare some of the drugs to some of the vitamins. I thought it would have been quite interesting. But look, I think a lot of people benefit from vitamins overall. Not everyone needs them to the same degree, and that's part of the consultation. So there are people out there that do have exceptional diet, lifestyle, and attitude, and as importantly to me as a holistic practitioner, are also spiritually aware. So they're connected to other human beings. They're able to give and accept love, and that is just so critical to who we are. Yeah. So I think it's you look at those people, they probably don't need vitamins as much as somebody that's living a really ordinary lifestyle in terms of their diet and how much the sort of food they eat, their mental health, these sorts of issues. So I think there are some baseline supplements that most people will benefit from, antioxidants and maybe fish oil to help reduce inflammation. And one thing I just like to say to people overall in everything they do in life, but especially supplements, is just choose quality. If you're going to eat meat, just choose quality meat. If you're going to eat vegetables, just choose quality. You're better off having less, but having quality. And the same with supplements, and I know because we used to do a lot of stability trials and comparative analysis. And I know with fish oils, for example, you can get some pretty dodgy fish oils out there. So my recommendation is never buy anything out of a discount basket.
Right. Yeah.
And if you do,
fish oils is an interesting one, isn't it? Because I'm guessing, well, they come from fish, clearly, and fish are not swimming around in the most, in the cleanest of environments. How does a manufacturer of, say, fish oil deal with those impurities? I mean, can you get everything out? Can you get mercury and plastics out to ensure purity?
Well, the most important thing is to choose where the fish come from. The fish oil we used to produce came from Norway, and then they're tested significantly, and that's part of the TGA process. We need to prove that there was no mercury, no lead, no PCBs, etc. And that's all pretty much standard in Australian supplements. The one thing that's really important is that it doesn't oxidize. So every now and again, bite into a fish capsule and just make sure it just doesn't taste disgustingly fishy, because it's oxidized and it's going to be much worse for you. It will create more inflammation. So that's what I mean when I say quality. You just want to make sure that you're using a good brand that's got good long-term stability data behind it, and you'll see that on the use-by date.
It's interesting, and I think it's worth saying that I was looking at the deaths of various substances on the TGA site from 1971. Just a light bit of reading that I like to catch up on.
Spare time.
But I did happen to look at it, the deaths from various things from 1971 to the present day. And I think there are several thousand deaths a year from prescription medication. But as far as I could tell, no one had died from a multivitamin or mineral, and only one person, and it's interesting you should choose fish oil, one person did die from a fish oil capsule. They choked on it. It was too big. It was big. And they are big. They often are big. But it is sobering to know that, isn't it? That it's actually quite safe, but it's important for you to be specific about what you take rather than a shotgun approach.
Yeah, absolutely. And with oncology, there are specific herbs and supplements that you can use together with pharmaceuticals to get better effects.
Oh, okay.
So, and that's something that we would look at on a case-by-case basis, depending on the type of cancer. For example, the most common pancreatic cancer drug is gemcitabine. And gemcitabine will prolong a person's life by about 70 days. But when you use it with curcumin, and a high-quality curcumin, you can prolong someone's life in this particular study up to 161 days.
Wow.
Now, that's an early start. That's one of the first studies of its kind, but it just demonstrates the effects that it have. There's another study on green tea where they looked at using green tea with doxycycline and found that it increased its effect 2.5-fold. So it's absolutely amazing what herbs and nutrients can do by themselves or together with the drugs. And I like the idea if a patient's going to go through chemo, and most people will, if they've got cancer, I like the idea of using herbs together with them and antioxidants because it demonstrates that it allows a better efficacy with reduced potential for side effects because many of the chemo drugs downregulate very quickly. And that means that, you have 2 or 3 rounds and they don't work as well because you have quite specific systems within every cell that spit the drug out faster. And so every drug, they spit it out faster, so they've got to give you a bigger dose. So the benefit of using herbs may be less side effects down the track, I think, as well. Which I that would be the way of the future, I would hope.
Yes. Well, one would hope so too. Daniel, we've covered some territory here today. I wondered if we might just finish up. I wanted to take a step back from your role in the holistic medicine field, in naturopathy, homeopathy, etc., because we're all on a health journey together.
Yes.
In this modern world as individuals. And I wondered if you might think about what do you think the biggest challenge is for us as individuals on that journey?
Oh, look, I think the biggest challenge, when you take into account that a lot of the things that we're exposed to and our kids are exposed to, social media and the way the world's going with what do they call it when you the cancel culture, all of these things, to me, it's kind of sad because it just means we're not communicating and connecting well. In a recent study, I saw that 39% of people felt lonely, even if they were married or whatever. And all that means is that we're not listening to each other. We're not respecting each other's opinion. And I know that is a very psychological approach, but it impacts your physical health as well. No doubt about it. So for me, it's really important that we just show each other respect, no matter what you do. I respect medicine and I think there are better ways of doing things. And I would hope that some of them would respect us as holistic practitioners. And that's the way we move forward as human beings. We listen to each other and we just reflect and respond. And I just think that's probably these days the most important thing.
Well, Daniel, thank you so much for connecting with us today and sharing. No, I mean that sincerely. And thank you for sharing your knowledge and your wisdom with us. Thank you so
Pleasure.
much.
Thanks, Ron. Thanks for the opportunity. Thank you.
Well, connection. I mean, if we needed to be reminded of how important that is, just connecting with other humans, beings, face to face, enjoying each other's company, being able to shake hands, look at people's faces and body languages, not be concerned with whether our line is going to drop off, whether the Zoom is going to be a good signal or not, just enjoying the fact that we're with other human beings. I mean, it's what has made us great as a species, our ability to collaborate and cooperate and be creative and talk and be with each other. And I love the fact that Daniel keeps coming back to the holistic health approach, the holistic practitioner. because ultimately that is the way the body works and it's the way the planet works, and many people feel uncomfortable with that. It's surprising to me, actually. I sometimes shake my head at people's skepticism of holistic, and perhaps in the same way that the word evidence-based medicine has been hijacked, and you could justifiably roll your eyes at that. The word holistic has perhaps also been hijacked in some instances, but the fact still remains that when you stand in front of the mirror and you look at yourself, there's a whole lot going on there that is far more than just individual specialties all packaged up into a human body. It is actually a whole person, and that holistic approach needs to be taken. And I loved also Daniel's, I'd never really thought of it that way, but when the previous vaccines had been given, which were attenuated or deactivated viruses, the whole virus with all its complexities were there for the body to mount an immune response with B cells and T cells, which are also very important part of the immune system. Whereas a spike protein is very specific, and it's probably it is the reason why when you get a vaccine of these mRNA vaccines, the efficacy goes from the first 2 doses of 6 months, and then by the time you get a booster, I think the efficacy is down to 3 months, and then when you get your 4th dose, the second booster, you're down to about 10 to 12 weeks. And the question is, how often would you be comfortable having these boosters? Well, natural immunity, as has been outlined, is a real thing. And thank God for that. I never doubted it. But if you were listening to our public health, so-called public health experts, you would have been forgiven for thinking that it was redundant and that the mRNA vaccines had trumped, and I use that term very purposefully, had been trumped by natural immunity, been trumped by this wonderful new technology. Well, apparently not so. Anyway, Daniel, it was great to talk to Daniel, and as I mentioned at the beginning of the podcast, Daniel has lectured to health practitioners for many, many years, and most recently gave a 2-webinar series to health practitioners not open to the public, and over 20,000 practitioners felt that Daniel's message was important enough to listen to, and I was very happy to share him with you. I hope this finds you well. Until next time, this is Dr. Ron Ehrlich. Be well.
This podcast provides general information and discussion about medicine, health, and related subjects. The content is not intended and should not be construed as medical advice or as a substitute for care by a qualified medical practitioner. If you or any other person has a medical concern, he or she should consult with an appropriately qualified medical practitioner. Guests who speak in this podcast express their own opinions, experiences, and conclusions.